What time do you have on yours?
6 o'clock.
All right. I'd like to bring this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I please have roll call?
Commissioner Huiska,
Present.
Commissioner Gephardt,
Present.
Commissioner Rhodes,
Present.
Vice Chairman Smith,
Present.
and Chairman Hopper.
Present. Can I have an approval of the agenda, please?
I will motion to approve.
I'll second.
I have a first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
No nays. Can I have approval of the October 8th and October 29th minutes?
So moved. Second.
I have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have no presentations. Okay, so I'll go ahead and read this statement real quick. This is the time for the members of the audience who wish to be heard on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons may address the Ione Planning Commission at this time on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Ione Planning Commission. Please be mindful of a 4-minute time limit. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the Planning Commission may not take action or engage in a detailed discussion on an item that does not appear on the agenda. However, matters that require commission action will be referred to staff for a report and/or recommendation for possible action at a future commission meeting. Does anybody have anything to say? Alrighty. On to item H, the public hearing. The first is for a variance.
Okay, good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. I'm Beth Thompson, and I am sitting in for April Wooden, the City Planner, tonight. So I will first just go over the background of the item and then finish with the summary. So this is an application to approve a variance from development standards for 420 Sage Court, assessor's parcel number 011-350-028, to allow the construction of a single-family home with a reduced yard setback. Specifically, Axios Homes is requesting a variance to allow a 1,660 square foot single-family home at 420 Sage Court to encroach into the required 25-foot rear yard setback by 4.04 feet. And what this means is that basically you normally have your 25-foot setback, that's an imaginary line drawn across the rear of the property line, and that the structure of the home can move into that by 4.04 feet. State law requires that a variance request may be granted, but subject to specific findings that because there are special circumstances unique to the project, the application of the zoning code would otherwise deprive the property of privileges enjoyed by other properties in the same zoning district. So for the Planning Commission to approve this variance, specific findings must be made as identified under paragraph D of zoning code section 17.10.070. And as discussed in the staff report, the variance does address circumstances peculiar to the property. Specifically, there's an existing concrete masonry block sound wall located along the rear of the property line that would limit views of the encroachment from neighboring properties. And then secondly, the lot shape is irregular, so strict application of the zoning code would not allow the 1,660 square foot home to be situated in any manner on the property. So there's a narrow property frontage on Sage Court that requires the house to be set back, and then there's an angled rear yard lot line that also makes it difficult to achieve the setback. So it's kind of a uniquely shaped property. The variance would not create any special privileges or adverse effects, but rather would accommodate a single-family home that's compatible with the existing single-family homes in the subdivision. So it's made, as I said, to accommodate a 1,660 square foot home with no stairs, which would accommodate the needs of a retired couple. And this home is typical of other homes in the subdivision. They typically range from about this size, 1,660 square feet, up to 2,254 square feet. And also the project is consistent with the zoning code and general plan and would be accommodated in compliance with the city standards, except for this specific request. So with that background, staff recommends that the Planning Commission receive the staff report and review all the attachments, open the public hearing and take comment, And then after considering the comment, adopt a resolution approving a variance for construction of a single-family home that encroaches into the 25-foot rear setback at 420 Sage Court, Ione, California.
Well, thank you. Anyone have any questions?
This is a zoning at Wildflower, right? Okay, because at public hearing, I thought it was about the remnants.
We got, the next one is.
Oh, the next one is, okay. The only thing is this almost where your sales office is? Yeah. I'd like to ask that question,
It
because
is sitting on the lot where the sales office currently is,
Okay,
the construction trailer, actually.
that's what I wanted to know, thank you.
I just, as a point of reference, maybe we ought to accept the staff report and declare the public hearing open if we're gonna hear testimony from the audience.
I believe she is the proponent.
Okay, I have a question. 25 feet for a rear setback is a little bit, I don't want to say large, but it can be, I've seen smaller ones. Do you know enough about the project to opine as to why that is so large? Because it's, the side setback looks like it's 12.5 feet, and I don't have the recorded map, but I'm guessing.
I would just anticipate that because of the planned development, they came up with unique setbacks that are different from the remainder of the city.
Does the applicant know?
That was actually what was conditioned in the statute in the original project. The actual setback for the railroad is 100 feet.
No, I understand, but
And we were conditioned with our map to go ahead and only make that requirement if we didn't put the sound wall up. Well, we chose to put the sound up, obviously, because it's 100-foot setback would be all the way across
Right.
the lot. Why they did that, I don't know. There's quite a few different easements on this lot, which makes it so difficult for it to fit.
no, I can see that.
That's what we've been encumbered with, and I think that the sound wall, talking about, blocking views of other people, that faces the railroad and back to county property, so I don't think that really is a point to be, made, but, we've been kind of labored with trying to fit something on this lot, and we do have a buyer, and they are looking for a small 1660 plan to go on that particular lot, so we'd like to accommodate those needs.
Can I ask you a question while you're, is that where we are now?
I'll also open it up to the public.
So, sir, you said that with the railroad tracks there, it would have been 100-foot setback?
It is a 100-foot setback line. It is, the condition in our approval is that if we do not, a 100-foot setback would go all the way to Sage Court. It would make the lot not buildable. So we mitigated that by agreeing to place a 6-foot-high sound block wall along the railroad that actually goes through 2.5 lots there on the back that faces the railroad before it actually veers off and goes out. And that's when we come back to just a normal 25-foot setback, but we can't accommodate that due to the side yard setbacks. As you can see, there's a 40-foot PG&E easement and so forth and so on, that it makes it almost impossible to squeeze something in the middle small building envelope.
Is that block wall, is that built yet?
It is not built yet.
I didn't think so.
We would be
Now,
building that,
you're-
we're in our last phase, and we would be actually building the block wall as we go ahead and finish our last seven lots in unit number 4.
Okay, you're relatively new to this project, would that be fair to say?
We purchased the project, we improved the lots in units 4 and 5,
Okay.
and we've acquired unit number 3, which will be starting here in about 2 more months.
And just, this railroad easement is something that you basically inherited from past?
From Ryland Homes, correct.
Okay. I have no problem with this variance. The issue I have is that they're making you jump through all kinds of hoops for railroad tracks that have been abandoned. They're not used anymore. I mean,
They're being used on a regular basis.
or what?
I'll make a
This
comment
blocks
there,
some of the
that is
sound.
not abandoned.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, let me rephrase that. Not abandoned, but used on a limited basis by the speeders or?
Yeah, but it can be opened up. If anybody buys brickyard, the old brickyard, they can
Okay.
open it up and use that railroad.
Okay. Yeah, I know abandoned is not the correct term, but
So when might that happen?
I don't know, but it could happen, is what I'm saying.
because I was thinking that was kind of a ridiculous thing, but I suppose if the railroad can be used again, and I don't think we can get into that right now anyway.
No.
Okay.
We're ready. If we've opened it up to the public, if anybody has anything to say, now is the time. By all means, please.
I have a question on this. I guess this lot is what we're looking at here, where the house would be. So that's on the corner there, right, Tom?
Would you step up to the
So-
podium, please?
Okay, so I guess my question is, the barrier, that's the lot line in between the two houses?
Correct.
Okay, so, and how many houses are gonna be there, Tom?
There would be 3 houses, lots 243, 244, and 245.
Okay,
That would complete, those are part of unit number 4.
right, and so that's all on the, as you go up that road, that's on the right side.
Correct. As you go up Sage
So-
Court, those three houses have Sage Court addresses. And they're 50 feet each.
Okay,
This one's a little bit difficult because it's got the radius, but the 2 next to it will be 50 by 100s.
uh-huh,
And this is the odd shape, this is only 1 lot for 1 home.
right. Are the other lots gonna be larger homes?
The other 2 lots, I think one's supposed to be 1855 and the other one's 1660.
Okay, so they're all one story,
Correct.
okay. That's it.
The 1660 is the 1855 is the.
Is a 4-bedroom
Really?
single story.
Oh, that's a full,
It's a
That's the
4-bedroom
yeah,
single story.
yeah, that's, okay,
That's the one, correct.
right, okay, that's all. Did you have something to say?
No, that's, I already told you where they were.
So, any questions, anything else? Alrighty.
You're gonna miss the noise from the railroad tracks.
Do we have any other questions?
Well, I was gonna say the railroad does has the easement, and you get into big things, you mess with the railroad.
There are some areas that have to be re-tracked. They have taken and removed some of the tracking along some of those areas.
And they paved over it on the highways and, you know, but I suppose if you're gonna go from the brickyard on out, then that,
Well, they could open up the Cubalo, the Jaeger Ranch too again. You remember that, don't you?
But chances of that, we're not here to,
Yes, right. I agree with you.
so,
okay.
I got another unrelated
Please.
question. Okay. I have another unrelated question to this particular site. I'm wondering, the railroad there where the crossing is,
mhm.
there's piles of stuff there. Is that ever gonna be removed, or do you know?
Do they have any obligation to do that?
There's piles of like asphalt, just,
Yeah, that's the county, and
Okay.
if my understanding is correct, that exit or current drive-through is going to be basically abandoned when they punch it through to the other way. So, it may or may not be there. So,
okay.
The entrance was supposed to be originally on the highway, you know, on, was it 124?
yes,
Oh, from the other end?
Yeah,
Yes.
and there was, what, four units there, and for some reason, the past builders started building on 4 instead of 1. There's a bit of an argument, I guess, as to whether it's just numbers or whether it was supposed to be phases, but the fact is, they built number 4 first, and just kind of used, and Larry can tell you more about this than I did, because as I understand, he kind of made a little road there many years ago where there wasn't one, just to allow the fireworks people to get in there.
Right.
So there's a possibility, and I'm not saying one way or the other, because I don't know, and that's really a county thing, because that's a county road there, but there's a possibility that once they do get the final, the access to 124, there's a possibility that that could be blocked off.
Really?
From the county side. So,
You mean Brickyard Road would
Yeah.
be blocked off from Foothill?
Yeah, it's a possibility. I don't know. I mean, that's not up to us or anything, but it's just something you could ask about, something to be aware of, certainly.
Well, the original study was 80-20. 20% of the traffic would go out the back and 80% would be out on 104 off Foothill Boulevard. And somehow the city let them build out there without a left turn pocket. That's why it's going to PUC right now.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can we get back to the item on the agenda?
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Any other statements? I will close the public hearing and move this forward. Any final statements or questions? Anyone on this side? All right. I will accept a motion.
Well, I'm in favor of the application. I believe we can make all of the factual findings set forth in the proposed resolution. And based on that, I'm prepared to make a motion.
All right.
I can find the proposed resolution or the proposed motion.
I'm not seeing one. I was looking for one too.
Yeah,
She has one, but I can't find it.
it's just attached, I think. There's no proposed motion. I move that the Planning Commission adopt resolution number PC 2019-08, including all the findings set forth in the proposed resolution, approving the application for a variance that is before us this evening.
All right, and I have a motion.
I'll second that.
Yes. Second?
I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All righty. Let's move on to the next. The zoning text.
All right, this item is zoning text amendment ZTAA 2019-002. And this is a proposed amendment to the City of Ione zoning code to regulate short-term rentals. And this includes consideration of home shares and vacation stays in the city. And the draft vacation rentals ordinance was prepared by the city attorney for consideration and was presented to the commission as a discussion item on October 8th. Then the commission identified a number of potential changes that would be desired to this, including addressing definitions, codifying home sharing host application procedures, addressing requirements for obtaining a business license, clarifying the regulation for collection of transient occupancy tax, considering limitation on the number of home shares a resident could operate, and then also looking potentially at the geographic locations in which short-term rentals should be permitted or prohibited. And the commission requested that a public hearing be held to receive input on this ordinance prior to the preparation of a revised draft to ensure that the community's concerns were considered and addressed. And so this item is before you tonight, and I can go through the ordinance. I think, however, April may have already done that with you, so I didn't want to repeat that.
However, the only reason, we also had two members that weren't,
Okay.
and it might be good to go ahead and bring it back and go over it one last time, so they can have a better understanding of what's going on.
Okay, so basically this addresses vacation rentals or short-term rentals. So when someone wants to rent their home out for a week, 2 weeks, a night, this addresses that type of rental situation. So not hotels, motels, and it also doesn't address bed and breakfasts. So it would look primarily at vacation rentals. And it would apply to all vacation rentals except where there's a primary owner in residence. So it doesn't look like it's addressed hosted rentals. It looks like it primarily looks at unhosted rentals. And it requires that a zoning permit be that this type of use would request a zoning permit, which would be an administrative type of approval. And there are certain conditions where use permits would be granted. So To start off with, it does identify that the maximum number of guest rooms that could be rented out would be 5 rooms in a home, and if there was a request to have more guest rooms, then that would require a conditional use permit. It establishes the maximum overnight occupancy based on 2 persons per sleeping room or guest room, plus 2 additional persons, up to a maximum of 12 persons, not counting children 3 and under. And that would be overnight occupancy. During the daytime, there's an additional calculation that would allow up to 18 persons. So 18 persons could be present during the day in addition to the overnight guests. Or I'm sorry, 6 additional people in addition to the overnight guests, so a total of 18. And again, if people wanted to have a vacation rental where they had greater occupancy, either nighttime or daytime, they could request a use permit. Only single-family homes and a legally established guest house would be used as vacation rentals, so this doesn't provide for accessory dwelling units or second dwelling units to be used as a guest house or any other type of structure. Parking would be required, a minimum of 1 parking space for a vacation rental with up to 2 guest rooms, 2 spaces if there are 3 or 4 guest rooms, and then large vacation rentals with 5 or more have to have at least 3 spaces. And on-street parking could be considered for up to 1 space. The ordinance also provides for noise limits, and they are slightly more restrictive than the noise limits identified in the city's noise ordinance, so it would be a different form of calculating your noise requirements, and so this is a slightly different application of noise requirements than what you currently have, and it's, as I said, a bit more restrictive. The ordinance also requires that outdoor amplified sound is not allowed at any time, so people couldn't have speakers outside playing music or announcements or any other type of sound system. Pets are allowed and must be secured on the property, and nuisance barking is not allowed. Trash and recycling facilities must be provided. There are limitations on where outdoor fires can occur. Basically, no fire area can be located within 25 feet of a structure or combustible material, and then fire areas can be up to 3 feet in diameter. There are provisions for septic systems and sewer connections, provisions to require payment of transient occupancy tax, and that there must be a certified 24-hour property manager. So that would be one thing that either the city could certify property managers, or you could identify a type of program that property managers could go through to become a certified property manager to ensure that they're conversant on tenant requirements and just how to manage a guest unit. Provisions must be provided for emergency access, particularly for rentals located behind a locked gate in a gated community or a gated property. Once the permit is approved, a unit must post the requirements, and so they have to be posted in a prominent place within 6 feet of the door of the vacation rental, and they also have to be included in all of the rental agreements. So basically, any of their neighbors would be able to see the requirements, the guests would see the requirements when they enter the unit, and then they would also be provided to them as part of the agreement. And then they would also provide mailed notice of the decision to the nearby property owners. And there are a number of requirements also related to internet advertisements and listings. There's provisions provided for an enforcement process, so if there are complaints made, the ordinance establishes a procedure to address such complaints. There is a 3 strikes penalty, so if there are 3 citations, verified violations, or an officer of the city determines that the violations have occurred, either the permit requirements or performance standards, so you can have up to 2 within a 2-year period. On that 3rd citation, the property cannot be used as a vacation rental for 2 years, so there's a 2-year restriction before they could apply for another vacation rental permit. And then there's a number of administrative citations, or various acts that would trigger a citation for violating the performance standards. So that is it in a not so small nutshell. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I do have a question. We did take this up initially at our October meeting, and I think all of us were present. And I don't remember the answer to this question, and the question may not be a fair question for you, Beth, but what is the current state of the law in the city of Ione as far as allowing or not allowing short-term rentals like this?
So currently the city requirements are silent on short-term rentals. You do have a category called bed and breakfast inn, and so up to 5 bedrooms, or 5 rooms, very similar to a vacation rental, can be operated as a bed and breakfast inn. You just have a very brief definition of a bed and breakfast inn and no standards. It is a permitted use in the agricultural R3 and R4 districts, and then a conditional use in the R1C and R2 districts. Let me pull this up really quickly. Exact. I was wondering the same thing myself, so.
Well, I think it's important that we all understand, or at least acknowledge the background. This is, as I understand it, coming back to us at the direction of this city council, because there's at least one property owner in the city that either wants to or has been using his property as a short-term vacation rental. I may not know this for a fact, but more likely than not, he's in a residential zone. And I believe April told us that under those circumstances, his use of the property under the current zoning ordinances would not be a permitted use as a short-term rental.
Correct. There are no provisions for a short-term rental type use in the R1A or R1B, and a conditional use permit would be
So I just want everybody to understand, the baseline is if we do nothing, then the city of Ione does not allow short-term rentals in a residential zone. Because that's the direction I'm leaning, because I think this is a slippery slope.
So if you do nothing, you will have the bed and breakfast inn provisions, which do allow a short-term rental type of use in the agricultural R3 and R4 districts as a permitted use.
We're not changing that, though.
Right, that wouldn't change, but a lot of short-term rentals could probably operate under that definition.
Any other questions or?
Well, just to, I think, reinforce what Commissioner Smith is saying, I think it was 2 meetings ago when we discussed this at the full commission, the direction we were going at the time, and correct me, anybody, if I'm wrong, was to not do an ordinance at all. But if somebody wants to do a, short-term rental, they would have to come and, as these people are today, but with a different purpose, ask for a conditional use permit. And that way, all of the neighbors would be notified, which doesn't happen with this. That's one thing that bothers me with this. They get the permit, once they get the permit, then they tell the neighbors what the conditions are. Whoa, yeah, surprise, surprise. If we went the way we were talking before, to where they would have to come and request a conditional use permit, the neighbors would be notified, have a chance to come talk and see if it fit into the neighborhood or, just what the circumstances were. And then, if we were inclined to grant it, we could impose, whatever conditions we saw fit. And if there were, going to be a number of these, we would probably have to have sort of a standardized set of conditions, I would think, or at least some guidelines. But, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that that's where we had left this. And I was kind of surprised to see a whole new, code section presented to us.
My recollection is the same as Commissioner Gebhardt's. We had numerous concerns to the kind of comprehensive ordinance, and I too was surprised to see it come back. My guess is that perhaps April got some different direction from somebody else, but I think this is a real slippery slope. I think the city has we're a small city with limited resources. We don't have the staff to accept numerous applications for zoning permits or conditional use permits based on this ordinance and then to enforce the ordinance. And I think it may be a situation, I don't envision our community as being a hotbed for short-term vacation rentals. And it might be the tail wagging the dog.
I understand this comment. So one of my concerns would be that if you don't adopt an ordinance and you're silent on short-term rentals, Somebody could say that it's not addressed in your zoning code and operate one, and then it would be up to the city to respond to that.
To that end, I think where we left it
Mhm.
at our last meeting where we discussed it in Bonk was in October. That's exactly what we were going to do, is adopt an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance to, a resolution amending the zoning ordinance to say that short-term vacation rentals are not a permitted use in any zone, that they would be considered pursuant to the use permit process, conditional use permit process. And then that would, we can make that then that would allow staff and the city, if someone wants to propose a short-term rental for their property, to submit an application for a conditional use permit. And there might be some standard conditions which would be, available to tell them in advance, these are going to be the standard conditions, but there may be special conditions too, depending on where the property is located. I, for one, don't want a short-term vacation rental that allows up to 18 guests. The timing on this is interesting, and again, I don't think we're going to be a hotbed for short-term vacation rentals, but we took this up in early October. You probably recall that on the Halloween night, there was there was 2 murders in Moraga at a short-term vacation rental that had turned into a big Halloween party that was advertised on the internet. And there have been similar incidents, albeit in larger communities. But that's the kind of thing that, you're opening up Pandora's box with this kind of a comprehensive ordinance that says, you can have up to 18 people. You can have as many as 5 bedrooms occupied by 10 guests sleeping there and another 6 to 8 guests there during the day. If I were a neighbor living next to one of those short-term vacation rentals, in a single-family neighborhood, or even in a mixed-use neighborhood, I don't think I would want that kind of traffic or congestion or noise. And I'm surprised that we're looking at this the way we're looking at it.
That's where I thought we'd left it to. One of the other things that we wanted, besides specifying that these are not allowed as is, was to tighten up the definitions and maybe tweak the definition of bed and breakfast to, so it can't just be used to cover other things. But that's where there was it was at the October meeting, I believe. There was a woman in the audience who actually gave a very good presentation about just what you're saying. If their neighbor, for instance, did this, you don't know who's going to come in. There's little kids on their bikes and trikes up and down the street all the time, and for something like this to come in without them having any input whatsoever, just isn't going to fly. And you have just another aspect. We have the whole state, I suppose, but Ione, this end of the county, has a real severe housing shortage. This is going to cut into housing. I don't know. I think we need to get back on track to where we were a couple months ago.
So let me just summarize what I'm hearing so far. I'm hearing that you would like to see short-term rentals addressed, subject to a conditional use permit requirement in all residential zones. You would like a definition for short-term rentals that probably includes both hosted and unhosted vacation stays so that they're both covered by that conditional use permit requirement.
I do, if I remember correctly. Also, we were leaning towards having someone on the property always hosted.
The premises while they were there.
Because if there were any issues, then that way you had a contact, not necessarily the renters or a management group that is not necessarily local. That was one of, if I remember, and the other thing that I also recall is we were leaning towards looking at one of the larger cities down south that had a very stringent write-up that we wanted April to at least look at. And I wanna say, was it Huntington Beach or
Long Beach.
Long Beach? Yeah.
I think you're right.
And that where it was very, very tight, on what they were allowing, and that maybe some of that has come forward, but that was one of the things that we wanted to see, how stringent, not to say that it can't be done that way, or be used as a rental, but we had some we wanted to make sure that it was tight and somebody could be actually responsible, so you don't have an issue like at the Halloween.
I understand. So I think one of the reasons this is back before you is that, so you could hold a public hearing and get official or formal public comment, and then we'll go back and we'll incorporate these recommendations and bring something back to you that's probably much briefer and hits on each of these points that have been identified.
Well, I think the last component was going to be that this would be setting a precedent for the county, and I think we had talked about looking at maybe what the city of Sutter Creek or city of Jackson or some of our other incorporated cities have done as far as local,
If they've done anything.
if they've done anything.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was another component, speaking of the.
Yeah, we can prepare a matrix that shows what each city does, where short-term rentals are allowed, how they're allowed, if they're allowed.
Yeah.
Or if
Yeah, I think that's certainly necessary, but we also have to remember, I mean, Ione is not Sutter Creek.
Right.
It's
No.
not Jackson.
You don't need to be like leading the charge on, let's set
Well,
the
I mean,
tone.
There's gonna be a lot more requests, I'm sure, for
Right.
short-term rentals in, say, Sutter Creek than there is in Ione,
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Can't imagine.
With that, I'll go ahead and open it back up to the public. And,
Could I make a public comment?
yes,
I had no idea this was gonna be discussed, so I'm glad I came here tonight, my wife and I. I have concerns too about this kind of
can you
situation.
state your name first?
Oh, David Livingstone, and I live over in Wildflower. So, the reason why we moved to Ione was to have a nice, quiet little neighborhood. And where we live, we have a nice, quiet little neighborhood. Kids running around and stuff. I'm concerned about this kind of thing opening up, just as this gentleman said about the Orenda Moraga thing, because I travel to the Bay Area, and I see this stuff, and I don't want to be around it. So, people have a tendency now just to, if they get a house, I don't know if this is citywide, or in a specific area, or a specific residence, but to me, it has potential problems, and I would not like to see it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Trustner, 111 East Main Street. I kind of like the way you guys are going. I read this earlier and I thought, oh crap, they're going to open it up and want to tax everything again. Because the city of Ione is always scrounging for a nickel and they lose $1 on the other end. But the way you're going, how you treat each one individually and come back for a use permit sounds like the way to go. Because if I live right here in downtown, and if I go out of town for 6 months after I'm retired and I may want to rent my home to somebody on a short-term basis, then I could come in and ask for a special use permit for a temporary type thing, and that would allow me to do it. I understand your concerns about, all these Airbnbs busting out all over and parties everywhere, but that's pretty few and far between. I've stayed at a lot of Airbnbs. They're very nice neighborhoods. They're nice and quiet. Most people that go to Airbnbs are like this gentleman here. They just want to go there and take some time off and relax. So I like the way you're going, where it's just a short-term thing, and you have to come in on an individual basis, and you guys can look at what the property owner is trying to do. But I kind of hesitate when a city body tries to tell a property owner anything they can do. I'm a little skeptical of that, but the direction you're going, I kind of like. So thanks.
Yeah, Mark, just one other thing. If you were going somewhere and you wanted to rent your house for 6 months, I don't think any of this would apply to you whatsoever.
Well,
It's short-term rentals.
Well, short term. If I'm going out of town for a month, maybe, or whatever. I just use 6 months as a
Yeah.
because when I retire, I don't want to hang around all the time. I may want to go somewhere. and I could make a few bucks off my house, you know?
Mark,
So-
one of the things we talked about in October was making sure it was understood that, as Commissioner Gebhardt noted, that we're not trying to regulate long-term rentals, which
Right.
are for more than 30 days.
Right,
You're free to rent out your house, unless there's some other agreement or restriction that, the city's not a party to that prevents you from doing that.
Mhm.
And again, for Beth's benefit, or any ordinance that comes back to us, whether it's an ordinance restricting or prohibiting short-term rentals, except if there's a valid conditional use permit issued, we need to define short-term rentals, and it's not defined in this ordinance, and a short-term rental is for less than 30 days.
right, and exactly. That would be a big help, but what she's describing is a little scary sounding, so I agree with you, gentlemen.
She didn't draft this ordinance.
Well,
Believe me,
I-
the initial ordinance was 3 times as thick. It
Well,
was
and
a book.
You know what, I tip my hat to you guys for stepping back and saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Because a lot of times we get people coming to the city, telling the city what to do with their ideas, their Bay Area thoughts, and it's like, whoa, this is Ione. So, step back for a minute. But thank you.
And I think it's important too for us to acknowledge that we're not trying to dictate to property owners what they can do with their property within reason. For example, if you're in a residential zone, you can use your property for residential purposes. Residential purposes does not allow you to operate a business from your home. And that's what a short-term rental is. It's basically a business that's being conducted with you're using your home to operate a business. It triggers payment of the transient occupancy tax and all kinds of regulation.
So, any other questions, any other comments?
I have one comment or a question, I guess, to Beth. Just logistically, I'm just trying to think of how this would be drawn up. We put in, wherever it's appropriate, to make sure it's recognized that short-term rentals aren't allowed without a conditional use permit. But we want to have sort of, I think, what I'm hearing, and I think what we have to, for consistency, we need sort of a guideline as to what those conditions would be. So like if you apply for a conditional use permit, you're already bound by, I'm just wondering like how you would write that up.
So what I picture doing is adding the short-term rentals as a use to table 17.22.030-1, and so we would add that as a conditional use, and that table addresses the allowed uses and permit requirements for the agricultural and residential zoning districts. And then we would either footnote that table and reference a chapter and just have a brief list of the standards that would apply. So we would identify the relevant standards, leaving you latitude to address the finer details of any unit, and then add definitions of all of the salient terms.
And since those standards or guidelines would be just that, once we got an actual application for a conditional use permit, it goes to the planning commission.
Yeah.
And we're free to, within reason, change those conditions.
So I would anticipate that these would be basic conditions that would apply across the board. Probably they must pay transient occupancy tax, it must be
Correct.
kind of some of the standard ones, and then perhaps have a list of issues for you to consider and provide further conditions or flesh out on a project-by-project basis.
I'm fine with that approach, and I thought that's kind of where we left it 2 months ago.
It was derailed somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. That's why I said that we ought to just keep it the way it was. Just make it simplified a little bit.
So
We have better control.
there is a motion, potentially.
Do we want
But
to?
we don't need a
I don't
motion.
think we need to do anything right now.
Then we just keep this open until we have new ordinance to come through.
Do we have to table it, Janice, or just?
I think there is a recommended motion on page 2-2, and it basically would move that the planning commission continue the hearing, direct staff to prepare a draft ordinance and resolution for planning commission consideration with the following provisions, and we would list those provisions, so addressing short-term rentals as a conditional use, defining short-term rentals and related terminology, and identifying basic standards, as well as providing latitude for the commission to develop additional findings in the future, and then to prepare an initial study examining any potential significant impacts of the proposed text amendment. If required, prepare a negative declaration regarding any potential significant impacts, and then staff shall come back and present the ordinance and resolution for planning commission action at the next regular meeting of the commission, or at such time as the environmental review is complete.
What she said.
Are we convinced that we need an initial study?
We may be able to just prepare a straightforward CEQA exemption. Typically, the noise is with a short-term rental, specifically if you have standards in place that address noise, wouldn't be greater than a typical single-family home, and the traffic wouldn't be significant. There wouldn't be any specific project or increase in the city to identify or to address. So I think we can address it under an exemption and provide the reasons why there wouldn't be a specific
So if I was fine with your modified resolution, I would just add in there, prepare an initial study if needed.
Perfect.
Is that your motion?
That is my motion.
I'll second.
I have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All righty. So moved. So do we have any other regular agenda, or actually do we have a report or anything like that?
No report from me tonight.
All righty, then hopefully give April our best in that she has a speedy recovery, and I adjourn this meeting.